How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd. Some more stories around the NFL that I wanted to talk with you guys on today's show. Very heavy episode on quarterbacks. In the first half of the show, we're going to talk about a potential disconnect between Jalen Hurts and his head coach, Nick Sirianni. Does it matter? Is it a big deal? I'll give my thoughts on that. Then more on Aaron Rodgers explaining his trip to Egypt that cost him to miss mandatory minicamp. He explains, his reasoning behind it and going further into just the structure of the offseason in general. And also Stephen Jones talking about the general feeling around the optimism level on the extensions for his big three players. Talking about Dak, CD, and what it means for the team and their potential Super Bowl window potentially closing in 2024. That and some more topics on today's show. Before I get started, I want to remind you guys, as I always do, if you have any question or comment you want to make, use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question or comment in my chat box. I'll read it out loud, and that way get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of our topics. It's a lot more interactive. It's also a massive help for the show and the network. So please, if you guys would, use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net. We would greatly appreciate it every time you guys are able to do that. But starting right away, right off the bat, with an interesting development, something that I don't want to say predicted or felt that I knew that this was going to happen, but you could kind of get a sense of this topic that we're going to start off here today with Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. First off, they're entering the fourth year of this partnership going into 2024. Sirianni was hired in 2021, and the first year as Jalen Hurts, starting as the official quarterback for the Eagles, was also 2021. And since then, they've made the playoffs in each of those years. The wild card round in 2021, they made the Super Bowl in 2022, and then most recently lost in the wild card round in 2023. For the most part, the performances and the production has been there, just plainly, generally, if you look at it, pretty successful in terms of this startup that they've had as a partnership. But what is now being brought up by the Athletic's Diana Russini, she recently wrote how their relationship, the one between Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, obviously, is still a work in progress, as she would put it. In her words, because of their different personalities. And if you watched any of the Eagles, maybe you're an Eagles fan or something like that, I don't think that's too hard to point out. Honestly, if you look at Sirianni, he's more of a fiery, more animated on the sidelines, it seems, more emotional, whereas you look at Jalen Hurts, every answer, you hardly ever see him, change his facial expression or be overly excited. He's more reserved, more of a calming presence, and that's something you'd like in a quarterback, just calming everybody down, having that killer mentality. But this led to there being a disconnect, according to Russini, last year between the two of them at times during the season, and also earlier this offseason after mandatory minicamp, when Jalen Hurts was asked by local media about Nick Sirianni potentially changing his coaching style this year, obviously taking a step back, letting Kellen Moore, operate more of the offense, changing the identity from what Nick Sirianni was used to. Jalen Hurts kind of gave a non-answer. Jalen Hurts didn't condemn Nick Sirianni or the way he was running things, but he also didn't stick his chest out for him and say that it had nothing to do with him. He wasn't at fault or anything like that. He gave he gave a politically correct answer to that, and a lot of people in the media, local Philadelphia media, and just some fans I saw didn't really take it the right way. Some of them felt that Jalen should have stood up for his coach a bit more, supported him more with his answer, and that didn't sit too well with them. But I'll give my thoughts on that after this next thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to their relationship was that that first part about Jalen's answer is indifferent to me almost, but this next part spoke more to me, just because if you remember a couple of years ago during that Super Bowl that they made in 2022, there was a brief moment that the camera showed Nick Sirianni and the sideline of the Eagles. He was standing next to Jalen Hurts, and there was a play that they were challenging, a no catch by a Kansas City Chiefs receiver. Nick Sirianni challenged it, and you can see when the camera cuts to the image of Jalen standing next to Sirianni, he was sort of like waving his hand back to the Chiefs, telling them, to come back. You guys got it wrong. It's going to be a no catch, so come on back. He was waving at him, sort of smiling, kind of poking fun at it. Overly confident, you can say, that he was going to win the challenge. And quickly, Jalen Hurts standing next to him, actually, kind of put his hand down, kind of pushed it down, almost like an embarrassed dad or something like that, with his kid doing something that he shouldn't be. That's the kind of vibe I got. It was pretty awkward when I saw it live. I don't think anybody pointed it out, really. And that always stuck in my head with just how this relationship, the dynamic of it is. You always see Nick Sirianni, I think, against the Chiefs this year, where they won in Arrowhead. You saw the clip of him celebrating in the tunnel, screaming to the Chiefs fans, and just being overly emotional about it, where I don't think I saw a single thing about Jalen Hurts or his expression of emotions at any point while he was actually playing in the game. So it's those kind of things that you can start to pick up on and realize that, yeah, they're a little bit different. And sometimes probably they don't agree on things. If Jalen Hurts is telling Nick Sirianni, calm down, like, you're doing too much, almost, in a way. But, he quickly pushed his hand down, and then that was that on that moment. Then Rossini goes on to talk about a little bit more that, she suggested in her mind that they don't have to be friends, but at least on the same page when it comes to running the offense, because that was also another thing that kind of sparked this disconnect, you could say, that Brian Johnson, the former offensive coordinator last year, didn't have a great run of full. Brian Johnson was the offensive coordinator. Nick Sirianni was still running his offense through Brian Johnson, and some sources say that dynamic, the way the offense was still being run, didn't really line up with Jalen Hurts, calling it conservative at times. But that was another thing just to add on to this. And now I can get back to the idea of just touching on this. Does this disconnect, does this different dynamic, different personalities really matter? And is it a big deal for them, to have to fix it? Is this something that they must address immediately? Well, going back to that minicamp answer that Jalen Hurts gave, that non-answer that I mentioned, that really doesn't matter to me. Like I said, I don't really find too much stock in condemning Hurts for not being overly protective of Nick Sirianni. It's not like they were asking him should he be fired or anything like that. They just asked him about him taking a step back, changing his offense in 2024, which I think most people would agree that there should be a change anyway, just because they didn't perform up to standard. But he gave an answer that fits his personality. Jalen, like I said, isn't overly animated, isn't overly emotional, not too outspoken, I guess, for a lack of a better terms. The reserved quarterback gave a reserved answer, and everyone's taking it as a surprise. That really didn't bother me. The Super Bowl video, the action of him pushing his hand down, that really spoke more to me, honestly, because if Diana Rossini describes this relationship right now as a work in progress, and they've been together for the last 4 years, entering their 4th year now, if it's a work in progress still right now, could you only imagine what it was in year 1, where they made it to the wild card round? Then after that, in their 2nd year, they were right away in the Super Bowl. If it's still work in progress right now, you can only imagine what it was back then. But you know what? Nobody talked about it. It seemed like nobody cared or nobody made a story about it because they were in the Super Bowl. They were in the playoffs. They were dominating everybody, and nobody talked about this other stuff. So really, I look at it as something you don't really have to fix or put all your attention on it. You don't have to make this a bigger deal internally or in the Eagles locker room as it is in the media, just because, again, this could all go away. Everything is solved with them just winning games. And last year, obviously, they were 10-1. Again, nobody was really bringing this up until they went on that losing streak. They crashed out of the playoffs, and now this is starting to come up because you're wondering what led to that, what led to such a dramatic decline in this Eagles team that seemed to be dominating, but then just blew out their tires and just crashed out of the playoffs. But yeah, really, I agree with Rossini when she says that you don't have to be friends. You just look at the biggest example in Tom and Bill Belichick. Yeah, they're friends right now. They're all very much looking like they are close friends, like they are close personally, and they might have been more than I'm giving them credit in their playing days. But at the time, if you look at them, their relationships on the sidelines, the answers that they gave, they never really showed too much love or they weren't overly emotional with each other than when they won the Super Bowl. I think that's perfectly fine. They don't have to be best friends, but as long as they're performing, that's the biggest thing, really. And the last thing I'll touch on this about this subject is that Diana Rossini pointed out the idea of running the offense and how that could have led to a potential disconnect, a disagreement between the two of them. I think that was interesting because I talked about it a little bit yesterday, how giving the keys over to Kellen Moore a little bit now is probably the right thing to do about it. But now, with this report coming out, it makes me think that this could have played more of a bigger role than initially we thought it could have been, because if you're thinking from the point of Sirianni and you just had a pretty poor season, honestly, with the expectations on this Eagles team, if the offense was a major concern and you're the one running the offense, you start to think that Sirianni might think it's better for him to take a step back and not put his job so much in jeopardy, if that makes sense, relinquishing this role in the offense, because he knows if it continues to struggle and they don't really change anything in 2024, the first person that's going to be out the door, unfortunately, is going to be Sirianni. I think he potentially could have come to a realization that that could be the case. So instead of, continuing to do the same exact thing, he had a change of heart, put his ego aside, let Kellen Moore run the offense now, because, again, they're not going to get rid of Jalen Hurts. He's probably going to be the one to leave the organization, be fired if they don't change something, and they don't see results in 2024. So right away, that got me thinking about that. Maybe that's the reason why Sirianni was just so adamant about giving the keys over to Kellen Moore, why he was so accepting about it, because, again, yesterday, a lot of coaches aren't really too open to doing that, but Sirianni, thinking bigger picture, thinking bigger than himself, did it. And now I think it's the best for this team. Again, to just finish off the topic, they don't have to be friends. They don't have to be calling each other every other day, checking up on each other, but they do have to perform, and that's the biggest thing. They have the best chance of doing it, I believe, now in 2024. They're absolutely stacked, so we'll see how much more interactive they are potentially. Everything's always better when you're winning. So when you're losing, of course, you're going to be a little bit colder, a little bit more serious, but winning solves everything, and I think they're going to do a lot of that in 2024. But we will leave that topic there for right now. We're going to be talking about Aaron Rodgers again, touching on his absence from minicamp, why he did it, and also expanding on just minicamp in general and how different it actually is from OTAs. We're going to touch on that topic after the break, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the show to continue on some more quarterback discussions on today's show. This time more on Aaron Rodgers, talking about his trip to Egypt, why he missed mandatory minicamp, and not only that, he expanded a little bit more on just the differences between minicamp and OTAs truly now that the NFL is going a bit more of a safer route, trying to emphasize player safety. He brings up the differences in discussing why he was absent from mandatory minicamp. He briefly touched on it. We talked about it when he mentioned it at a golf event, I think before last week, but now he expanded on it a little bit more when he appeared on the Pardon My Take podcast released yesterday. In that episode, kind of justifying his side of the whole story on why he decided to do that, why he went on the trip. And you guys can follow along on the screen. Obviously, he said that, I'm struggling to find it. The thing that people don't understand was that when I was in the NFC North, yes, years ago, there used to be a real thing called minicamp. It was 5 practices in 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 2 practices on Friday, 2 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. Now it's not minicamp, and right away, that's an obvious point to make. Rodgers bringing up the fact that, like I said, the NFL is going more of a safer route. You can see it in some of the rules and just stricter rules, actually, on some of the safety protocols that they have to follow. You're not allowed to touch on anybody. You're hardly allowed to really look at somebody the wrong way, honestly, in OTAs and the voluntary workouts, unless you want to get punished. The Lions were punished and had one of their practices taken away because they went overboard on one of them, or they had too much contact in one of their practices or something like that. So they got punished for it, and honestly, you see it with those type of rules, the contact rules, and now also in training camp, everyone's supposed to wear those funny looking helmet covers. You're not really allowed to make direct contact with each other's helmets for concussion protocols and stuff like that. So that just follows along with what Rodgers is saying. Everybody always talks about, like Rodgers alludes to, the old 2-a-day practices, how training camp and I guess even mini camp, like Rodgers is saying, used to be more of a grind. It used to be more grueling, where maybe you still didn't go full on and hit everybody, but at least you were there twice a day. Now the NFL has really gone away from that over the last few years, and that leads into the next thing Aaron Rodgers wanted to mention, and how is mandatory minicamp really mandatory, or is it really just that influx of a different phase, upgrading to a different progression in the offseason program? Is there much of a difference between OTAs and minicamp at the end of the day? To that, he said that they can arbitrarily put a tag on whatever week of OTAs they want and say, this is the minicamp week, which makes it somehow more mandatory than the other weeks, but it was an OTA schedule. That's how words can be a little deceiving from time to time. They can make a story about how I missed a minicamp when it was really 2 OTA days. I came to the first 10, alluding to the fact that, right away, leading up to that week, everybody figured that Aaron Rodgers was going to be there. Everybody figures that more of the players are going to rejoin their team during that week. Obviously, players, everybody around the NFL hears mandatory minicamp, so naturally, obviously, you think all the quarterbacks maybe that were holding out are going to be there. Some of the players that decided to work out by themselves, they're going to show up now and rejoin the team because it is mandatory. There are consequences if you don't show up, but Aaron Rodgers was absent from it for an unexcused absence. Everybody was searching everywhere to find out why he wasn't there. Then it came out that he was on an Egypt trip. That was pre-planned, and then people had their own opinions of it. But mostly the players in the locker room, his teammates, were asked about it. They didn't really feel that it mattered too much. They felt that, like Rodgers was saying before, really at the end of this statement, that most of his teammates said that he was here mostly when he didn't have to be. He was here throughout most of the offseason, so they really didn't have a problem with it. And Rodgers says the same thing. He came to the first part of it, made the first 10 practices, and then he missed the last 2 because to him there wasn't much of a difference, explaining how to go along with those safety protocols. The difference from OTAs now to minicamp, really, he is saying that there's hardly any difference now. They're on an OTA schedule, as he put it, and he felt, I guess, indifferent about missing the same level of intensity, the same level of training that they were going to do in minicamp because it was mandatory. He felt that there was really no difference in missing that time compared to OTAs because it really is just an extended period of OTAs in his mind. And to go off of that, I think that leads up into a whole nother discussion, still keeping it around Aaron Rodgers, but he brings up an interesting point on just how this offseason structure now with minicamp and OTA, I think macroly, that players just are starting to find this as indifferent at different phases of the offseason, because really it just shows how the structure of this offseason now is not taken too seriously at all. Players naturally, religiously skip the voluntary portions, right? Because those are the easiest ones to not get any criticism behind. They feel that they could train better by themselves. If the NFL is going to have these rules that you're not allowed to really touch anybody, you're not really, if you're not implementing something brand new, again, players will just decide to stay home, work out by themselves, or maybe they could go a little bit harder than the NFL allows them to when they're in a group setting. Also, same thing with OTAs. A bunch of players skip that frequently, but once they hear mandatory minicamp, everybody takes it more seriously, naturally, but I don't think it's for the right reasons. I just think that they hear mandatory, so they feel like they have to be there just because they're told to be there. It's mandatory, and you get fined, obviously, because of it. Nobody wants to lose money, but nobody's really there to amp up the intensity, to amp up the level of progression that you get when you're playing a more in a football-like environment, if that makes sense, right? In OTAs, voluntary stuff, you kind of know that you're just walking through it. You're implementing new stuff, maybe. You're walking through it. You have a little bit of pep in your step, but it's still football in shirts and shorts. You might have a helmet on, maybe, but even then, it's still pretty much the same thing. Then, once you hear mandatory minicamp, you'd naturally think that you'd get a little bit more game-like. I don't know, maybe you could shove somebody or something to the ground. You can be a little bit more physical on a pass contention or something like that. But it really seems like Aaron Rodgers puts it, it's just a continuation of OTAs. But also, like Aaron Rodgers says, they just decide to label it mandatory minicamp, where really there's nothing changing from that. And I think that's a problem now for the NFL, and why you hear all these reports coming out that they are really looking at changing the offseason, because not only are they starting a little bit too soon for some people that, again, believe that they don't have to be there. If people are going to skip it, why do they make it seem like you have to be there? Now you get to this minicamp issue with OTAs not really being too different, and that's where it becomes a bigger problem, because nobody's really taking it seriously now. And I think now, if anything, maybe more players start to think that it's becoming a bit more acceptable to not be there. Of course, you have to think of the financial consequences of it, but still, with Aaron Rodgers talking about it like this, it doesn't paint it in a great picture and a great image at all. And also, going back to his teammates, if you think about it, if I'm a teammate of Aaron Rodgers or just a teammate of anybody when in any sport, honestly, if you get to a point, I'm sure if you've played sports, you've gone to a point where you're in the off-season, you're training with people during a phase where maybe you don't have to be there, but of course, you kind of have to be in good spirits with everybody. If you're there, fine with everybody in like a chilled environment, in a nonchalant, pretty easygoing part of practice, but then once you hit August, if it truly gets harder and everybody's in this grind, everybody's bonding over, working hard, pushing each other to the limits, and one guy decides to take a vacation, that's where I think it becomes a problem, because he almost believes that he's above it. You don't get that same sort of chemistry, that same sort of bond with a guy that decides to skip the hardest part of the offseason when everybody's there working together, improving themselves. But in this case, nobody is really bothered by it, because, to support Aaron Rodgers' point, OTAs into minicamp, nothing really changed. It was just an extended portion of OTAs, it seems like, according to Aaron Rodgers. So no one's really going to have a problem with him missing it anyway. And the financial part about it, honestly, to Aaron Rodgers, doesn't really matter too much. And even for the Jets, holding him to a different standard if they decide to not fine him, it's Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that surprises anybody if the Jets don't decide to fine him, because he is this entire team. Honestly, if we're speaking truthfully, if he's not there, if he's not happy with something's probably going to change, because so much is invested in Aaron Rodgers. Not to say that he should be held to the highest pedestal, to the highest environment, but that's just the reality of things. Patrick Mahomes, same thing. Josh Allen, same thing. Tom Brady. You can name all the quarterbacks. But you could also say that they were there during mandatory minicamp, where Aaron Rodgers wasn't. But pre-planned trip to Egypt, how much difference is there between OTAs and minicamp is really something that this statement has opened my eyes to a little bit. And that's why, really, the NFL should probably do something more about changing the structure of it, really making it more intense, keeping it within the limits of safety to try and not have it look like it's just unnecessary for players to be there. You want them to be there. You want them to support this structure that the NFL has laid out for them. So Rodgers talking about it like this doesn't really do that, but overall, I felt indifferent about it. I didn't think it was too big a deal that he wasn't there because really at the end of the day, yes, you want him to have chemistry. You want him to have as much reps with this team, but it's not like he's learning a new system. You know, they brought Nathaniel Hackett over for a reason to implement the same offense that Aaron Rodgers was comfortable with. So it's not like he has to learn a whole new thing and learn the timing of everything too much because he has been throwing to some of his teammates since the end of last year while they were still playing. He was able to throw again. So I think he's had an adamant of time of being there, of learning the timing with everything because, again, it's an offense that he's used to. It's an offense that he's run plenty of times while he was in Green Bay. So that argument that he should have more reps, should try to be on the same page with everybody, kind of gets diluted a little bit when it's the exact same offense he's been running for however many years in the past. If anything does go wrong, it's probably on the other guys. But you want to sharpen that. Aaron Rodgers has been there for a while, so I really didn't feel too ill-willed about it. I didn't think it was too big of a problem. But now, starting training camp, he will be there. They actually reported today. I assume they're going to have their first practice tomorrow, so that'll be more of a telling sign on where they are and how much really that trip, missing mandatory minicamp, really affected any sort of chemistry or anything like that with the players. But moving on from this topic, moving on from what Aaron Rodgers says, we're going to go straight into another break in the show. But when we return, we're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys, what Stephen Jones said about where they are in the contract negotiations, his level of optimism in getting all three of Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, and Dak Prescott's contracts done. And is this the end of their Super Bowl window? I think that's a legitimate question that we're going to answer after this break. We'll be right back after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here on the show now to jump right into some more contract talks around the Dallas Cowboys and how it's going, how it's progressing so far. Not too much progression so far, but we got some words from Stephen Jones on the level of optimism, just a general feeling on where these things are heading into really the start of training camp now, because they will report to their first day of camp tomorrow on Wednesday, where there also will be the first practice on the following day on Thursday. So we're at this point where we're getting closer and closer to football, the most football-like environment we've seen up until now. And generally, the optimism, the thought around everything is that CeeDee Lamb, one part of this three-part issue for the Dallas Cowboys, probably won't be there at training camp, will still be holding out, but Dak Prescott will be there, and he is where I wanted to start because Stephen Jones spoke about the overall view on the pending extensions for their big three. CeeDee, Dak, and Micah Parsons. He spoke on it on the Athletics Scoop City podcast, on Friday. And on that note, on just a general overview of the entire thing, he said that we're having conversations with his agent, with Dak personally, both Jerry and myself. He knows our goal is to keep him here. He also understands the challenges, and you see what happens to teams when you do have these top-priced quarterbacks. At some point, it is a challenge to keep everybody, and off of that comment, he mentioned that he compared it to the Chiefs a little bit, mentioning how Tyreek and the Chiefs had to move on from one another in order for Tyreek to get that massive deal, top-of-the-market deal to reset the entire market with the Miami Dolphins. He also brought up the fact that, same thing with L'Jarius Sneed and the Chiefs, that he had to move on. Even though he was franchise tagged, it was a tough decision that the Chiefs had to make, so that they had to move on from him, arguably their number one corner. Now he signs a top-of-the-market deal with the Tennessee Titans, but the fact that he brought those up is kind of contrary with what he's saying overall, because he is optimistic about extending all of them and not really making those tough decisions like the Kansas City Chiefs had to do. But again, he says he remains optimistic on extending all three of them. He has some leeway with Micah just because that's not until probably next offseason or the following at that. But right now, the main focus is CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott, which both of them could make an argument to reset the markets or at least make the top of the market price that currently stands for both of their positional groups. And off of that, on the topic of CeeDee, I thought it was interesting that Stephen Jones brought up the fact that, of course, CeeDee Lamb is going to want something to reset the market completely, jumping from A.J. Brown's $32 million per year all the way up to $35. That's great for Justin Jefferson, but he had the caveat of comparing it to the Minnesota Vikings and saying that, the Vikings don't have anybody else other than Justin Jefferson now making anywhere over $20 million per year, whereas the Cowboys, have Trayvon Diggs at $19 million per year, Zach Martin up there at around $20 million, DeMarcus Lawrence also up there in a high-priced contract, and Dak Prescott too, who was already extended about 4 years ago, all making close to the top or near the top of the top earners at their position. So that is something that he wanted to bring up as sort of a caveat to know, yeah, CeeDee Lamb might want the same as Justin Jefferson, but the way the teams are set up, the way the contracts are set up with each team, a lot more hurdles for the Dallas Cowboys to get to that point than it is for the Minnesota Vikings. They only really had to worry about getting to the price of Justin Jefferson, and you saw that the consequences of that was moving on from Kirk Cousins. Ironically, the Falcons gave him a lot of money in order for him to be the starter in his mind, but then they drafted Michael Penix. Would have been the exact same situation that it was in Minnesota, but those situations ironically played out. But sticking to the Dallas Cowboys and more so going forward, already they've seen some of their developmental players like a Tyler Biadasz leave in free agency, and Stephen Jones admitted that the fact that they had to do that they drafted him, developed him into a solid player, someone that you'd love to keep on your roster forever for their entire career. He said that it was a hard decision to have to move on from him, but that they just simply couldn't fit him, and that they don't like seeing some of these young players move on from that because you have to deal with these contract negotiations for some of the top earners projected in their position in CeeDee, in Dak, and Micah Parsons. But the fact that he did mention that, he just wanted to emphasize that he wants to continue to do that ideally, not only because, that is something you want to do, that is something you take pride in doing, knowing that you drafted him, evaluated a player, and developed him into somebody that you can call a top of their position player. He emphasized relying on guys like Tyler Guyton, who they drafted this year, Marshawn Nealand as well, a pass rusher for them, to try and relieve some of this cap space, to not always have to pay top of the market money to have a good roster. But it starts to back up on you a little bit now. They're at that point now where they have to make a decision, going back to that point that Stephen Jones made about the Chiefs and how they had to relinquish some of their best players in order to work something out in terms of keeping Chris Jones or keeping other players on their team, extending maybe Patrick Mahomes at the time. They had to part ways with some very reliable players, some top of the food chain like players in Tyreek and L'Jarius Sneed. And that's something that right now the Cowboys are trying to figure out as they start training camp. But on that topic, on now moving over to this idea of the Super Bowl window that I wanted to bring up, because I've talked endlessly about this Cowboys team heading into 2024. Jerry Jones saying that they're all in way back in like March or something like that, to now where we are right now. Yeah, they're all in. At the start, I didn't really believe that based on what they were doing, but now all in is starting to become, in my mind, this Super Bowl window. Is it about to close, or is it really threatening to close on the Dallas Cowboys at this point based on what we've seen this offseason and just based on the nature of their team? Because Stephen Jones also cleared up one point that a lot of their players, a lot of their major pieces on this team, like CD and Dak obviously, but also their coaches, their entire coaching staff, and Mike McCarthy are all on one-year deals. So that really doesn't scream the fact that this team is planning anything past this 1 year. And that's not an ideal situation you want to work out in, sort of that lame duck year that everybody labels it as. But he wanted to clear up that it doesn't mean that they don't have faith in them to finally get over this playoff hurdle, this playoff curse that they've had to deal with over the last, almost 3 decades. He wanted to clear that up. He wanted to bring that to light. And also, I hate this point that they always bring up. I heard Jerry Jones talk about it. I think I actually might have heard Stephen Jones mention it prior. To sort of back that up and have confidence and show his confidence in this staff, some of the players that they are trying to get these negotiations done with. He brought up the point that over the last 3 years, they've had 3 12-win regular seasons in those 3 years, obviously adding up to 36 wins in the last 3 years. And he said that at some point that should be recognized as something, I guess, to hang your hat on. But now that leads me into more of this Super Bowl window question, because like I said, I don't like that point. I don't like that because it's almost like a cop-out. He says it's something that it has to be recognized, but it's not so much recognized with the Cowboys, because if you compare to somebody else who has double-digit wins, who has continuously been at the top of the NFC, like the 49ers, they're a team that's recognized for it, because when you dominate so much in the regular season, they follow it up with good performances in the playoffs, exceeding some expectations, like when Brock Purdy came in, and they still made it to a conference championship before he got hurt. Then right after that, they followed it up with a Super Bowl. They've been in and out of the Super Bowl, the NFC championship game, for the last 4 or 5 years or something like that. They're a team that you can say, yeah, they've had double-digit wins in the regular season. Wow, that's impressive. It is a fair point to bring up the fact that hanging around the rim in terms of the Cowboys right now, it's getting to a point where that's just not good enough. Honestly, if you want to be in the same status as the 49ers, even the Detroit Lions, for an example, just because I think they're just starting their Super Bowl window, hanging around the rim does you no good, because you don't get anywhere else past that point. The Cowboys, because of who they are, the Cowboys, their legacy and everything like that, they don't get trophies, they don't get medals or anything like that. They don't get the recognition for having a good regular season just based on their history, the 5 Super Bowls that they have. That's just not the standard. And unless you want to lower that standard, which would be an absolute travesty for this organization, you can't hang your hat on that. You can't hang your hat on just having great regular seasons, being solid in the regular season, and then laying an egg every time you make it to the playoffs. We're at that point right now where I think that Super Bowl window, honestly, is threatening on closing. Like it does with all great teams, going back to the Kansas City Chiefs point that Stephen Jones brought up. You could have argued that at one point, once they moved on from Tyreek Hill, some might have looked at this team, just even last year, looked at this team like, oh, maybe they're not all there yet. This is one of the worst offenses that Patrick Mahomes has had to play with. Are they really true contenders with this team? They responded to moving on from Tyreek Hill. They moved on from L'Jarius Sneed this season, and they responded with winning a Super Bowl last year. Now this year, they added Marquise Brown. They developed Rashee Rice. They drafted Xavier Worthy. They responded to all those questions about it. And also the same thing with the 49ers. Now they're closer to where the Cowboys are right now because I think they are trying to keep that window open just a little bit because they have to deal with Brandon Ayuk next year, Deebo Samuel, and other players that they have to extend, Brock Purdy as well. They're going to have to respond in a way because you have this period of having a lot of good young players in your team, and the Cowboys have had it for such a long time now that now in 2024 where there are some of your best players threatening to leave, this Super Bowl window now is really threatening on closing unless they do something about it. And once they do something about it, if it is a big decision like moving on from Dak or moving on from CeeDee, they have to respond and, back their decision up in any way that they can because I believe that they just have to lose a star, honestly, like the Chiefs did as the best example because I don't see how you win a Super Bowl, and that's obviously still the standard with the Cowboys, if you have the highest paid quarterback, the highest paid receiver, and the highest paid maybe outside linebacker or pass rusher, but everybody else is just average to below average in terms of talent in the league. I don't think you could do that. I don't think they could win with that makeup of a roster. They have a lot of issues to address: wide receiver depth, quality at running back, their offensive line. They lost a couple starters. So, yeah, it's something that they have to get going on, obviously, but to have optimism on all three, I don't think that's really where this team should be at right now. Is it the end of their Super Bowl window? I think once that big decision finally drops, once they extend somebody or they don't extend any of them in this offseason, then we're going to get a better understanding, a better answer on that. But for right now, I'm still indecisive on it, just because they might surprise me and extend somebody or do something that they haven't done all offseason. But we're definitely going to touch on it later on this week or later on in the offseason. But we're going to end that topic there. We're going to head into another break, and once we come back, the second half of the show will have topics on Jordan Love. I'm going to explain more on his holdout, being the first quarterback to hold out this offseason, and also just some other updates around other quarterbacks as we start training camp. Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Daniel Jones. Some pretty important pieces of news around them that I wanted to explain to you guys at the end of the show, so we'll be right back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back to start this second half of the show with a couple more topics, starting off with some more quarterback talk on Jordan Love. Yesterday, the first day of the Packers, training camp, as they began camp yesterday, Matt LaFleur, you had everybody walking out there to the field. Matt LaFleur ran out there with Jordan Love with him, but Jordan Love wasn't wearing any gear, didn't have his helmet with him or anything. He was in a shirt and shorts, and not the greatest sign if you're a Packers fan and obviously dealing with the negotiations of a contract extension with Jordan Love. You would have loved to still see Matt LaFleur running out there with Jordan Love, but obviously him ready to practice, and that is where we are right now. Obviously, with that being the scene, yesterday on Monday, the media had to ask Green Bay's general manager about it, and their general manager, Brian Gutekunst, revealed to the media that yes, Jordan Love will not be practicing until both sides have agreed on a new deal. Jordan Love's agent, David Mulligetta, informed Green Bay of that decision back on Saturday. So this was something that was predetermined, something that Jordan Love and his side of things have agreed upon and communicated it to the Green Bay Packers. And now everybody's just realizing it from yesterday, showing or seeing rather, that Jordan Love was not ready to practice at all. Not a holdout, but more of a hold in, because this isn't a situation where I don't think they're disagreeing on the fact that Jordan Love should get extended. I think everybody, like General Manager Brian Gutekunst said to the media, that he feels that they're close on a deal. We saw it in what we talked about yesterday in Jeremy Fowler's report over the weekend, that the vibes, the sensations between everybody are good. So that's why Jordan Love is there, not holding it out, technically not showing up at all to, show that he's disgruntled or anything like that. He's more holding in, being in and around the team, around his teammates and things like that. I'm sure they all understand what the situation is, obviously, but that will be the case until they get something done. Up until now, what we mentioned yesterday, the good feelings and everything like that, that's all accurate, it seems, but we have to talk about now the price range. What kind of price, what kind of range are we talking about? I mentioned that Jeremy Fowler yesterday said that the floor, the absolute floor right now is about $50 million, obviously. And on that topic, on Jordan Love's agent, David Mulugheta, I bring him up because that will be a huge part in everything on how he has negotiated massive deals in his past based on his other clients, and how that could be leading into an area where Jordan Love could seriously reset this market, or at least match Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence in the title of the highest earning quarterback in the NFL, because David Mulugheta now has a history of doing this with his clients, like I mentioned. You look at just this offseason, Christian Wilkins, massive deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. Calvin Ridley, nowhere did anybody think that he was going to get the kind of contract that he did, a total value of $100 million with the Tennessee Titans. Nobody saw that coming. David Mulugheta negotiated that for his client. Then also Antoine Winfield became the highest earning safety in the NFL right now and in NFL history. And then just in the past as well, for other clients for David Mulugheta, you have Jalen Ramsey at the time when he got his extension, got near the top of the market. Same thing with Derwin James, another safety that was earning top money. And you have the ever-famous Deshaun Watson, got the most guaranteed money ever in NFL history, $231 million, I want to say. So a very rich history and a very positive history for Jordan Love now, that should probably be expecting the same thing to happen here with the Green Bay Packers. And also, another client that we have to keep an eye on is T. Higgins. He is a client of David Mulugheta. How that situation is panning out with the Cincinnati Bengals, he's probably going to want top of the market money, and he could probably get it with Mulugheta as his agent. But sticking with Jordan Love now, a lot of these deals show that they are top of the market. So that is where we could be heading now with Jordan Love. And obviously, when you're going to commit that amount of money to Jordan, it's going to take a lot of negotiating, ironing out all these little just things that you have to work out with when you're talking about money, the guaranteed, how it affects the salary cap and everything like that. But apart from Gutekunst's optimism, feeling good about the whole situation, ESPN's Adam Schefter also came out and said that this deal could get done sooner rather than later. And I would agree with that, just because, this is really the only thing the Packers have to worry about now, because already through this offseason, they extended another pivotal part to their team on defense. They just extended Kenny Clark to a big deal, not market setting, but overall how much he's earned from the Green Bay Packers over the entire time he's been there, almost 10 years. I think I heard it on the Athletic podcast that generally, historically, he could be one of the highest earning defensive tackles ever based on that. So Kenny Clark got his extension done already, and now with Jordan Love, that's probably the last thing that the Packers really have to worry about. And obviously, it is the most important thing that they have to get done. Obviously, at this point, everybody has the positive feelings about it. Everybody thinks it's going to get done. I believe it's going to get done eventually, if not very soon. I wouldn't be surprised if this happened as early as tomorrow. Maybe in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I get a notification on my phone that it's done. But right now, my level of concern with this, just overall, probably is at about a 3 out of 10. Just because, like I mentioned, Green Bay, this is the last thing that they have to check off on their list of offseason responsibilities. So the way Jordan Love played last year, the way that he played in the playoffs especially, kind of leaves the Packers no choice. But now, do they want to make him the highest paid quarterback in the NFL? Do they want to reset the market entirely? Those negotiations take a little bit of time. But again, I expect this to happen at least the earliest at the end of this week, at the absolute earliest, probably, if not tomorrow or one of these days coming up. But the biggest thing that could go wrong is that this just extends until the end of next week, say, and then my concern level would probably be at about a 7, maybe an 8 out of 10, because at that point, at the end of next week, even halfway through next week, we're close to August or even already in August at that point, and you're still without your starting quarterback. Matt LaFleur even made some comments on it today to go along with this point when he said that he had no problem with this decision by Jordan Love, but he did say that they had to pivot quickly now and sort of change their structure and things that they do go over in practice because they are without their starting quarterback. So now that we're ramping things up, now that we're getting serious about football in the end of July and heading into August with preseason just around the corner, you don't want Jordan Love just sitting out there. Of course he's going to be learning, taking everything in, but you want him on the field executing some of these plays, some of these reps with the young wide receiving core that they had, handing it off to Josh Jacobs, taking snaps from the center. All those little things matter, and the longer that they wait, it's not a practice wasted, but it doesn't hit the same, really, with Green Bay and their team without Jordan Love being out there practicing with everybody and leading this team. But so that's really my biggest concern. Again, right now, it's not too big of a level of worry that something is threatening this to happen, like the Cowboys and deciding between two players or something like that. Jordan Love really has nothing else to concern the Packers about. He has waited his turn behind Aaron Rodgers. There's no injury concerns or anything like that. And on top of that, he balled out last year, proved to everybody that he could be the next face of this team for the next 10 years or something like that. I can't think of anything that would stop this deal from getting done, but the longer it pans out, the longer nobody knows why it's taking this long, that's when I'll start to worry. But for right now, it's in a good spot. The Packers should be the first team to get it done out of the Dolphins with Tua and the Cowboys with Dak, and that benefits them overall as well. Other than just having Jordan Love on their team, having him at a cheaper price potentially is always a great thing for any NFL team. So we're going to follow up on that when that gets done. I'm sure we're going to talk about it, but we're going to head to the last break of the show. When we return, a last sort of update, early roundup of news on other quarterbacks around the NFL. Lamar Jackson dealing with an illness. Joe Burrow being fully cleared to practice now that training camp is starting for the Bengals. And also Daniel Jones ready to go fully after recovering from that ACL injury. More details on each of those quarterbacks when we quickly return after this break. Thank you for joining me for this last segment on today's show. Just a quick roundup on some good news, some great news for some teams, and some just weird, a little concerning news for the Baltimore Ravens on just mainly the quarterback starting off training camp, not arguably, actually the most important position on an NFL team. What's going on with three of the biggest quarterbacks for various different reasons in the NFL? We're going to start off talking about Lamar Jackson because he is the one that I first saw on my news feed, talking about what was going on with him. Right away, the Baltimore Ravens started their camp on Sunday, and the first thing I saw about the Ravens and just anything related to them, usually you see clips or something like that to get everybody hyped up, but this one wasn't so positive for Lamar because on Sunday, when Baltimore started training camp, like I mentioned, they announced that Lamar would not be practicing with them and that he was actually sent home due to an illness that wasn't really disclosed. There wasn't too much detail on what it was or how he got it or anything like that. John Harbaugh talked about how he started feeling sick during the meetings on Sunday, and on their way out to the field, it didn't, improve or anything like that. He got checked out by the doctors. The doctors made a decision to just send him home. He missed the first day, and he also missed the second day yesterday. And now it obviously isn't anything to worry too greatly about, like a knee injury or something like that, obviously, but it's not the most ideal way that you want to start off training camp. Similarly to Jordan Love, you'd love to have Lamar Jackson out there to run things over in a game-like scenario with Derrick Henry now getting integrated to the team, Zay Flowers in a big second year for him, Rashad Bateman as well, all the expectations that are placed on him and just the way that his teammates have been talking about him. You want Lamar Jackson out there to have those reps with those guys, but on top of this, on just to get a better idea of maybe when we could see him back, NFL insider Josina Anderson described this situation of Lamar as a pretty bad illness. So to me, that just says he could be out maybe towards the end of this week. Maybe they'll just give him a few extra days and not have him practice this entire week. But again, not too many details disclosed about what Lamar was dealing with, but not an ideal situation. Something that the Ravens unfortunately have to deal with, but again, it shouldn't be anything too serious to really worry about in regards to threatening the regular season or preseason or anything like that. The next quarterback we wanted to get to is Daniel Jones, more of a positive note for him. The Giants officially begin their training camp tomorrow. It looks like they're going to have Daniel Jones in there with them, involved in any sort of drills or practice routines that they have to do, because Daniel Jones on Sunday spoke with ESPN's Jordan Raanan, and he said that, in quotes, he said, "I feel good, ready to go for training camp, looking forward to next Wednesday." He said this back on Sunday, obviously. So all season we've seen Daniel Jones talk about his injury, saying that his goal was to make it a training camp and participate right away with the team, not have to miss any time, and that it looks exactly what he's going to be doing based on his words and just based on his actions. Brian Dable has also talked about it. He said that Daniel's been looking good. He kind of had to protect him a little bit during OTAs and minicamp, but really it seems like Daniel Jones has recovered fully from that torn ACL he suffered last year that ended his season, obviously, in a big year for Daniel Jones and quite honestly everybody in that organization for the New York Giants. It's a positive thing that they're going to have Daniel out there fully integrated right away to prepare him as much as possible for a very pivotal 2024 because of everything that's transpired with Saquon and Hard Knocks. And you see how, honestly, that they almost just had to decide between paying Daniel Jones and paying Saquon. They opted for paying Daniel Jones, and now him coming off an injury, already dealing with a lot of injury concerns just off of what he's shown throughout his entire NFL career and the turnovers and everything like that. They decided to invest a lot of money in him, so it has to pay off now in 2024. It looks like Joe Shane, their general manager, is in the same feeling, so the fact that he is starting training camp with them only amplifies his chances of getting up to speed with everything, feeling confident, getting the repetitions in that he could get back to the form he showed in 2022 where they had that road playoff win and made it to the divisional round. But we're a long ways away from that, but at least it's a positive sign for the Giants to have Daniel Jones in there, officially fully ready to go for the New York Giants. And then lastly, talking about being fully ready to go for your team, Joe Burrow officially cleared for contact right before they start training camp. During an interview with local media on yesterday, head coach Zach Taylor announced that Burrow has been fully cleared for contact, and as the entire roster reports now to training camp yesterday, their first practice was actually today. I'm sure you guys all saw his new haircut. How about that, right? Looking like, I saw a lot of good comparisons to Eminem, to Cody Rhodes in WWE. It's just funny. I was not expecting that at all from Joe. But more seriously, on his injury, he was fully cleared to practice with this team. He has been involved with throwing officially. He returned to the practice field and throwing on that injured wrist back in May during OTAs, but he again wasn't fully cleared. They were still being a little bit cautious with it. But now, after that wrist surgery in late November and the progression he's shown through returning to throwing in May already, he has been fully cleared now already. And training camp honestly hasn't been too great for Joe Burrow, just overall from a standpoint of staying healthy through it. There was the 2020 year where there was no real training camp at all. Then he had to deal with other injuries during training camp that limited his participation. There was one, the most recent one I remember was his calf and injuring it during training camp, and really scaring a lot of the fans and a lot of members in that organization that during this period he has been pretty unlucky with it. So the fact that he is fully clear now to not have to miss any time, at least right off the bat, is huge news for the Cincinnati Bengals team that, again, is in a big year just because this team could look a little bit different next year with T. Higgins potentially moving on, how they solve this issue with Jamar Chase and getting him extended. Hopefully they do that. It looks like they're preserving themselves to do that. This team could look very different going forward after this year, so the fact that Joe Burrow is out there is the best case scenario for them. And also, Zach Taylor revealed that they plan to give Joe Burrow some playing time in the preseason as well, which is pretty big news. Again, he has been injured during training camp. The times that he has been injured, it's been halfway through that have forced him to miss the preseason portion of training camp. Not like he was going to play a whole game or something like that, or half a game, just because he is the starting quarterback and they never do that. But to kind of put it into perspective, Joe Burrow, since he has been on the Cincinnati Bengals since 2020, has only ever played, again, mostly due to injuries, but this is pretty big news to get Joe Burrow out there, to get him in as much of a game-like scenario that you can before the official start of the regular season. He didn't specify which game he would play in or how much he would play in, but because he mentioned preseason, their first game is on August 10th versus the Buccaneers. He could play there. My guess is going to be the second game on August 17th when they travel to Chicago. And then if he hasn't played by then, the last game is going to be on August 22nd versus the Indianapolis Colts. So 2 home games, 1 away game. Usually teams wait for that middle game to get some of their starters out there that they want to have out there. But, you know, how you monitor Joe Burrow, how you see that risk progressing through the next couple weeks in training camp will be a huge determinant of that. But positive news overall for Joe Burrow, for Daniel Jones, not so much for Lamar Jackson, but nothing too severe for any of them. Just wanted to give you guys a quick update here on some of the biggest news around some of the biggest players for their teams as we start training camp this week. The rest of the teams will start tomorrow. I think the Dolphins, the Cowboys, and the Steelers are some of the teams that still have to report. So officially, we are in that season. I always love seeing the clips on social media around the plays already being made. Patrick Mahomes dominating that area, looking absolutely unstoppable with some of the clips I've already seen. It's ridiculous, but it is a beautiful thing to see now with football getting closer and closer to being back. But now, with that being said, that will wrap it up for me on today's show. That'll do it for the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast episode today. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the entire network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel for different forms of NFL content on there around this show as well. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to catch the full live shows with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thanking you again for joining me, and I hope to see you guys all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that